Hello, everyone. Gordon Causey coming to you live. Call this take two. It is now the 4th of March, 2025, just after midnight in my time zone, Eastern Standard Time. I'm in southeastern Ontario, Canada, which is all over the news now because of the new tariffs that are slated to take hold right now, the stroke of midnight. The US, the Trump administration is imposing 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods um coming into the US from Canada and Mexico. So that means any importers bringing things into the United States will have to pay a 25% tariff to the US federal government. And I've got Brett Skinner is back. I was on earlier, and for whatever reason, I was buffering. I am in rural southeastern Ontario. I'm in farming country. The internet connections out here tend not to be as robust as they would be in the big smoke of Toronto, where that picture is. You can see that's painting that includes the CN Tower. Uh, I'm about 2 hours east of Toronto. Anyway, I tried doing a stream directly from YouTube, and for whatever reason, it was buffering and lagging. And everyone who was on the live with me at the time was saying it was unwatchable. Hopefully, going through StreamYard, which I'm getting more and more comfortable with, it doesn't have those issues. We shall see. I see 3 people have already jumped on the live. Hopefully, we get some more. Fill up the live chat. This is going to be very much a repeat of what I was talking about an hour or so back. Sharunyan's also here, uh, saying never have to work a day in our lives thanks to AI. Oh. Yeah, and I do my best not to interact with AI, but unfortunately, it's hard to avoid in today's world. Whether you want to or not, you're interacting with AI. But getting back to something of a theme on my channel, I've been saying for the better part of a year now that what I see coming down the pike is that the world, and by the world I'm referring to the Western developed world, US and Canada, certainly Western Europe, Australia, the world's largest economies, the Western developed world, that we are facing an inflection point, that we are going to get hit with so many crises, plural, all at once. And what is going to be proposed is that we are going to be told that we are being faced with global challenges, and it requires a global response. And that will necessitate individual nation states like Canada and the US and Europe, etc., ceding their national authority to a globalist world body so that we can address these global challenges. And now we get into biblical dystopian revelation style, mark of the beast, antichrist, globalist world leader coming onto the scene, being given, or if you want to equate it to the old Star Wars franchise with Emperor Palpatine being given imperial powers with the dissolution of the old galactic senate. Uh, Although I prefer the biblical version, but whichever one works, it's the idea that crises bring about when people are faced with a crisis, whether real or perceived, then they quite often lose the capacity to think critically. You retreat into the fight or flight mode, and people will hand over all their liberties, all their rights, all their freedoms for the promise of safety. And it's that old line attributed often to Benjamin Franklin, I believe. And it goes, those who give up their liberty for security will have neither. That might not be the exact quote, but that's the general idea of it. What's going to happen We are heading into a very tense situation. The US at midnight is imposing 25% tariffs on all products, anything coming into the US from Canada and from Mexico. But I'm going to fixate for the moment. I'm in Canada, so that's what I'll fixate on. And anything that US importers bring in from Canada into the US, they will have to pay to the US federal government a 25% tariff. So if an importer in the United States brings in $1 million worth of US or Canadian softwood lumber, they will then have to give $250,000 to the federal government. And obviously, that's going to have an impact on the cost of lumber in the United States. It's going to be inflationary. Perhaps some of that, costs, some of that tariff can be absorbed. Perhaps there can be streamlining, if perhaps they can find some efficiencies, whatever, to lessen the impact, but I cannot envision there being no impact whatsoever. What's even scarier, though, is the manner in which my side, the Canadian government and governments, because we're dealing with federally and provincially, how we are going to respond. The largest province in Canada is the one in which I reside, the province of Ontario. Canada as a nation, as a whole, we have a population of in and around 40 million. Ontario is probably punching up somewhere around 18 million. We're nearly half the population. We are the economic engine of Canada and have been for a long time. However, we've ceded that somewhat to Alberta, because Alberta is the energy center of Canada. It's from whence we get so much of our oil and LNG, liquefied natural gas, that comes out. A huge portion of it comes out of Alberta. We look at the province of Quebec. They are a massive producer of hydroelectricity, and the Canadian and US economies have been so incredibly integrated, especially after 1988 when we entered into a free trade agreement together, which was later in 1994 expanded to include the Mexicans, and it became known as NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. I got Brett asking a question. What is your opinion on it? I believe all countries are too far in debt. Basically, steal from Peter to pay Paul. Who owns the debt? And in a lot of cases, so much of the debt instruments are owned by China. They're bonds. They're bonds that are paying interest. Brett's further saying, Shaw, you could never trust politics and politicians. Anyone watching this channel, I'm not a type, but a lot of things I like. Aluminum and steel, that was very specific to one sector of the economy, and I could see the rationale for it because Trump wants to revive the US steel and aluminum industries. And how do you do that? The US is the world's biggest market, probably either the world's biggest or one of the world's biggest consumers of steel and aluminum. And if you want to have production, and if you want to revive those industries, the best way to do it is to bring in protectionist measures specific to those industries so that you can build up domestic production, domestic supply. But now this is broad-based, this is across the board. Anything that Canadians export to the United States, the importer will be paying a 25% tariff. And how is Canada and Ontario, my home province, going to respond? Doug Ford, our premier, which is the equivalent of an American state governor, was on NBC today and talking about how the how Canada and how he specifically in Ontario is planning to retaliate. For what it's worth, I don't think this is Doug Ford coming up with this on his own. He has advisors, he has, I'll call them deep state players, bureaucrats, but behind him, telling him what he can do, advising him, and then he's just the mouthpiece. And what he is saying is that Canada, or rather Ontario, is going to stop sending nickel. He's going to blockade refined high grade Ontario nickel from going into the US. Now, according to what Doug Ford is saying, and again, I don't think he's speaking out of his nether regions, I think he has advisors, bureaucrats, call them deep state players if you like, feeding him this information. But he is saying that the US manufacturing industries, that 50% of the nickel they use is from Ontario, is from the province of Ontario, and he's going to shut it down. And he is claiming that within 2 weeks, you're going to have US factories shutting down, US production facilities shutting down, because he's going to turn off the tap, as it were, on Canadian nickel or Ontario nickel flowing into the United States. I don't know all the things which nickel goes into. Obviously, it goes into batteries. That's one component. I imagine it's a major component in other, in computers. I don't know everything that goes in the automotive industry. I'm sure it's rather pervasive. I've got to do some reading on it. I did check in to see what kind of production the United States has, domestic production of nickel, and there's only one active producing mine, Eagle Mining, based out of Michigan. They have one active nickel mine in the United States, and apparently there are nickel deposits, I believe, in the state of Minnesota, but I don't believe they're being actively mined. And is there sufficient nickel resources in the United States that they could make up for the shortfall? And if there are, how long would it take for mining production to ramp up to a degree that it could do it? Like two big question marks. One, is the nickel there to be mined? And even if there is, how long would it take to mine it and backfill if Ontario follows through on Doug Ford's threat? And it sounds like more than a threat. It sounds like a promise. We're going to shut it off, and we're going to go into the liquor stores all across Ontario, and all of Ontario liquor stores are government owned. The Liquor Control Board of Ontario is a crown, what we in Canada call a crown corporation, meaning it's owned by the government of Ontario. We have two types of crown corporations. There's federally owned crown corporations and provincially owned. And the LCBO, Liquor Control Board of Ontario, which operates all the liquor stores in Ontario, it is owned by the government, and Ford is promising to remove from the shelves all all the booze coming in from the United States. It's going to be removed from the shelves. Canadians will only be able to buy Canadian booze or booze from other countries other than the United States. You'll still be able to get your champagne. You'll still be able to get Chilean wine. You'll still be able to get Russian. I don't know if you'll be able to get Russian vodka, but you can probably get Finnish vodka or Scandinavian vodka, whatever. I'm not a drinker. I drink strictly socially. Not that that matters. Anyway, let me see what's being written. Laura Floyd has shown up. Good to see you. Uh, and yes, Laura is in Canada. If memory serves, she's in southwestern Ontario, probably 3 hours or so. Um, no problem. I'm going to be reading up more on nickel. It's a vital component in a lot of things. Nickel plating is something you see on a lot of products, but I don't know enough. Uh, And I like what Brett's writing. We know you don't drink, just drink maples. I bleed maple syrup. And getting back to my thesis statement that I've had for the better part of a year about so many different crises, all coming at us, and I've been talking about this. And one of them has been war. Another one I mentioned is, economic turmoil. I've talked about the potential for disease, climate disasters, uh, any number of things, cyber attacks, that everything will be coming at us all at once. This has been something of a prediction I've been making, and that at some point, a globalist type body like the WEF or the UN will step in. And remember, and the UN and the WEF have partnered. They have partnered, and so if you're talking about one, you're talking about the other. So a globalist body, probably under the auspice of the United Nations, will step up and say, we need to cede, individual nation states need to cede their sovereignty to a globalist world body, because the challenges we are facing are global in scope and they require a global response. And that once these challenges have been addressed and resolved, then we can return to the previous status quo. We can restore individual nation state autonomy, and good luck. Then it never comes back. And this is where we get into the WEF Agenda 2030. We get into the UN's like-minded 17 sustainable development goals, these SDGs, all about having the vast majority of humanity in the Western world, and actually the rest of the world too, in a situation where we are nothing and we are happy, as Klaus Schwab so famously put it. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Um, Oh, Laura Floyd's all the way down in South Texas. I have you mixed up with Townhouse Gardener. I've got a few people have changed their usernames, and so it makes life difficult. And Brett, of course, is in, if memory serves, the great state of Wyoming. So I have a lot of Americans showing up on the stream. I know that Hank Holiday, who's likewise a Texan, he was on the stream earlier when it was lagging when I went directly from YouTube. And I want my American friends to know that I hold no ill will or animosity to anyone in the United States of America. And I'm not actually, I think Trump is getting some bad advice. I think Trump is beholden to certain individuals. I look upon Elon Musk as being something of a Trojan horse. I certainly look upon him as an individual who has globalist a globalist mindset. And Trump is very enamored with him. Elon Musk is wealthier than he is. He's certainly smarter than Trump is. And that's not to say Trump is stupid or anything, far from it. Trump is very intelligent, and especially when it comes to deal making. But that doesn't mean he knows everything about everything, despite his rhetoric to the contrary. Trump will always say, nobody knows military like me. I'd be amazing at military. I know it better than anyone. Women's issues. You'll never have anyone better knows more about women's issues than me. I'm amazing at women's issues. The economy. No one knows more about the economy than me. Nobody. Absolutely nobody. Oh, healthcare. I know more about it than anyone. I'm very smart. He's a blowhard braggart. And he does that out of necessity because he understands the political sphere very well, and he knows how to dominate the room. And the way you dominate the room is you never show any sign of weakness. And Trump has learned the game very well, but that doesn't mean he's accurate. He doesn't know everything there is to know about world economics and trade. And I do not think this idea of tariffs, I do not think it originated with him. I think he has players in the back who are gaming him and are getting him to bring about what's going to bring about a trade war. And when a trade war ensues, the economy goes south. It's one thing to bring in industry specific tariffs and duties to bolster a specific industry sector, like steel, like aluminum, that's one thing. But to do it across the board on everything, I would invite you to look up something called the Smoot-Hawley Act, Tariff Act of 1930, named after two congressmen, two U.S. congressmen who put forward a bill which imposed tariffs on just about everything coming into the United States from abroad in 1930, in around 40%, even higher than what we're seeing Trump do. And it is widely believed to have made the Great Depression and to have taken what would have been perhaps a recession and turned it into the Great Depression. And it led to a massive decrease in world trade, a massive decrease in productivity, and a massive decrease in wealth, and a huge increase in unemployment. And what did that lay the seeds for? That laid the seeds for how did the world get out of the Great Depression? It wasn't FDR's Great New Deal, and it wasn't anything Canadians or Europeans did. What ended the Great Depression was World War II. That is what ended the Depression. And so we're seeing the seeds planted that will very potentially have severe economic impacts all over the world. And then everyone's poor, and then you bring about war. And we already have war brooding. There's a war going on between Russia and Ukraine. And we have the hawks in the US. We have the Liz Cheneys and that type, the neocons, who are all beating the war drums, and the war propaganda is going over the top. It's just like the Vietnam War era, where the United States had to come in and protect those poor South Vietnamese who were the victims of an aggressive neighbor to the north and an unprovoked invasion, and we have to protect them. And Zelensky, when he was in the White House, said, you have the benefit of an ocean, but when it's on your doorstep, you'll feel differently. And that's where Trump famously said, don't tell us how we're going to feel. Don't tell us how we're going to feel. You don't have the cards. Zelensky was trying to promote this idea that you got to stop Russia now, because otherwise dominoes are going to start to fall, and it's going to be on your doorstep eventually. Trying to equate, it's the same type of rhetoric that was used during the Vietnam War. And now Zelensky has gone over to Europe, and they're all in. They're all in. The president, or the prime minister rather, of Great Britain is even talking about British troops going and fighting alongside the Ukrainians against the Russians. You talk about a recipe for World War III. And how much of this is orchestrated? How much of it is by design? And who are the players involved? Are the Russians involved? Is Zelensky? Are we watching a wrestling match? Are we watching Hulk against Andre the Giant? And everyone's playing their role, and everyone's reading their script, and we're just the people sitting in the front row next to grandma with her handbag going, "Kill him, Hulk, kill him," believing that everything that's said is genuine? Or is it just scripted out theater with faces and heels, like there is in world wrestling, or rather pro wrestling? Let me read. Eat Me from Montreal has shown up, so we have some Canadian representation. And Laura is saying, with respect to Donald Trump, he is funny too. He has a vicious sense of humor, which is a sign of intelligence. Uh, uh, Trump is not the idiot he is made out to be. He's also likewise not the huge genius he presents himself as, who knows everything about anything. And he's also prone to he can be manipulated just as anyone else. And I'm convinced I think there's a strong possibility that he is being manipulated into bringing in these tariffs that are going to crash not just the US economy, but the global economy. This is not the year 1930. In the year 1930, there were lots of people around. People had property and they farmed and they had chickens in their backyards, even in suburban locations, even in places, even in cities. People who had a little bit of property would have a backyard chicken coop and they'd have a vegetable garden and women knew how to sew and men knew how to fix the car on their own. You didn't have to hook it up to a computer. And people still, some people still had a horse and a wagon. And we were a lot more, the population was a lot more resilient back then. We had a lot more skills. Now we've outsourced everything. A lot of people, we can't even cook. We go and we have to buy processed food that just gets heated up in the microwave or the oven. We don't make much, if anything, from scratch anymore. Everything is factory farmed. There's no local farmer and butcher shops anymore. Everything's factory farmed. And we are not prepared for what is coming. And we're a softer population. We've been conditioned to expect instant gratification, instant satisfaction, no pain, no discomfort, no problems of any kind. If you're hungry, call this number, 30 minutes. We'll have food to you in 30 minutes or free. If you're anxious, take a pill. If you can't sleep, take a pill. If you're overweight, take a pill. If your partner in bed is driving you crazy because they have Jimmy legs and they keep kicking you in your sleep, here, we have a pill for that too. It's called restless leg syndrome. Take this pill. Don't worry about the side effects because if you gain weight because of that, that's a side effect of our medication. Don't worry, we have medication to help you lose weight. And if you become diabetic, we have medication for that too. And if diabetes leads to cardiovascular problems, we've got SGLT and SGL2 inhibitors. We got Crestor and Lipitor that you can take. And then if it goes to your kidneys, well, then we got dialysis. Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. We're not accustomed to any levels of discomfort in today's world. And we could be heading toward, I believe we are. I don't think it's a matter of could. I think definitively we are. And people are just not going to be able to cope. We don't have the resiliency. We don't have the skills that we had back in 1930 when you had a large chunk of the population who had been born in the previous century, in the 19th century, in the 1800s, who knew how to do things. And now, goodness, if your cell phone breaks down or doesn't work or loses connectivity, people feel like they're shut off and they go into, they have to increase their anxiety medication. And this is the type of world, are we going to be facing challenges in this type of world? And then what else are they going to throw at us? Will we have a climate disaster? Are we going to have more wildfires? People have speculated about DEW, directed energy weapons, and weather modification technology that exists. HARP. Are we going to have another disease outbreak? Are we going to have an outbreak of bird flu? All you have to do is put on scary music on the news and you can scare the bejeebers out of a ton of people. Let me catch up. What's Brett writing? I don't know what Canada's like, but USA, at least in my world, the economy can't get any worse. I'm always broke due to inflation. Yeah, we're taxed. Canada is taxed at an unbelievable rate. Now, we do have universal health care, although you'd be amazed at the number of Canadians who do not have a family doctor. They don't have a family doctor, so whenever someone gets sick, they either have to go and line up at a walk-in clinic or they have to go to the hospital emergency room to get seen. And uh, but because our healthcare system is publicly funded, that's one out-of-pocket expense, but it's paid for out of our taxes, and it's literally pretty well darn near 50% of every penny you earn goes to some level of taxation or another. There's income taxes, both at the provincial and federal levels. Then we have what's called the harmonized sales tax, with some of it sales taxes. Some goes to the province, some goes to the feds. Used to be two separate. They used to apply them separately. It was 5% GST, 8% Ontario sales tax, 13% total. Then we have additional taxes, excise taxes on gasoline, and it's tax after tax after tax after tax. Um, Brett's also writing, furthermore, now the government will no longer use term depression. Oh no, we haven't. Well, there's an old line that I'm going to repeat. It's not an original to me, but what's the difference between a recession and a depression? A recession means your neighbor's out of work. A depression is when you are out of work. And uh, and Laura thinks that's a very good point. What Sharunyan's saying, I don't know how great. I'm just a voice in the wilderness. Um, I do have very firm and fixed opinions, but I'm also wrong. I get lots of things wrong. I thought Kamala Harris was going. I thought Joe Biden was going. I did a video on it. I thought Joe Biden was going to vacate the presidency, 2 or 3 weeks, sometime in October, just before the election hit, and that she would then be that, some reason would be found to either, Joe Biden was either going to die, and then she would take the oath of office, or they would use whatever the amendment is, 14th, 15th, 16th Amendment, that allows the cabinet and the vice president to determine that the president is no longer mentally fit to be president. And they were going to push Biden out and install her, so that she would be number one. She would have been, that would make her the first female president of the United States in history. And then she would be running as the incumbent rather than as the vice president. And I predicted that. That's what I thought was going to happen. Wrong. Not even close. Trump romped to a victory. But did the powers behind the curtain decide, okay, we'll let Trump win, and then we'll let him orchestrate, we can manipulate him and orchestrate a great takedown. We'll destroy the economy and get everyone ready for World War III. Because if we cut off nickel to the US and it severely impacts US manufacturing and threatens to really harm the US economy, and it harms the US arms manufacturing industry, because I'm sure nickel is a key component in all manner of weaponry. Well, what's going to happen then? Could Trump sign an executive order authorizing the military occupation of Canada to ensure, because it's a matter of national security to the United States, that we secure access to Canada's vast nickel and other mineral deposits that are vital to our security, to American security? Could that happen? I think it could. I think it could happen. I can't believe I'm going down these streams of thought. But it all ties into what I've been saying about the fact that Agenda 2030 is real. And this goal towards bringing in a globalist style government, something akin to what was written by George Orwell all the way back in the 1940s, I think it was, his seminal novel, 1984, where the world was divided up into three basic spheres of influence. There was the Western world, that was Oceania. Then there was the Middle East, and that was Eurasia. And then there was the East, which was East Asia. And those were the three principal divisions on the planet. And there was always a war going on between two. Oceania was always either allied with Eurasia or at war with Eurasia, and likewise with East Asia. They were either allied with them or at war with them. And everything went down the memory hole as soon as the alliance changed. And I've thought about this many times in my own, the fact that when the Russians invaded Afghanistan and the US was hell bent to ensure that the Russians didn't gain full control over that key piece of real estate and all the resources there. So, what did the United States do? They started to arm, fund, and train groups like the Taliban to destabilize the Russian occupation, the Soviet Russian occupation. And so, at that point, the Osama bin Ladens and the Islamic world were the allies of the United States because they were going up against the Russians. But then flip things around after 9/11, when Egyptians and Saudis and other Middle Eastern players, the story, the official version of what happened on 9/11 being that, these terrorists crashed buildings into the planes. And now we went to war against that same group that we had been allied with before. I include Canada and the US as one. We're a junior partner. Canada is a junior partner to the United States. Now I think we're being set up to be sucked into them and then eventually sucked into a globalist enterprise. And it's a scary notion. It's a scary notion. Could the US send military forces to occupy Canada to ensure their access to vital Canadian resources and minerals? I don't discount the possibility. And then Katie barred the door. As everything unfolds, is it the WEF that comes out on top, and the UN and these globalist players? Are the Chinese going to be looking to exploit the situation and to be the top dog after it? I do think there are things going on behind the curtain that we cannot see, that we cannot contemplate. But I can't imagine that everyone behind the curtain is all in lockstep agreement about what should be done. Um, just going to try and catch up on what is being written. Wow, there is so much being written. All right, let's just go through the messages and get caught up. Uh, Forging passwords is a crime. Brett is writing, Laura, what do eggs cost in Texas? Yeah, Brett was talking about that the other day. Bird flu, the bird flu scare has led farmers to have millions of chickens culled, and it's driving up poultry. It's driving up egg costs in the United States. Hasn't affected us too badly here in Canada, but I'm sure it's coming. And you know, you got a factory farm with 3 million chickens, and two of them test positive for bird flu using the PCR polymer chain reaction test. And now we gotta kill the entire flock because of a faulty PCR test. Why not just build herd immunity among the chickens? But what do I know? My scientific degrees all come from Facebook. Lagging a bit. All right, let's see. Eat Me from Montreal is writing. I used to live in, okay. I don't, Brett is, talking about the Smoot-Hawley Act and, how people in 1930 were able to adapt and overcome, to use a militaristic term, adapt, improvise, and overcome. And we're not conditioned for that. That's not our world anymore. Eat Me's writing about cats. We used to have a manual to fix said car by ourselves. Yeah, yeah. About cars, I think is what what you meant to write. Thanks, Brett. Brett saying I was alive in 1930. I was actually talking to a gentleman today who was born in 1943. So he's 82 or so years of age. And he was saying what a perfect time to be born. And he's so glad he's coming to the end of his life now. He feels so sad for his kids and his grandkids in the world that is being handed to them. And he 1943, no memory whatsoever of World War II, and then he got to grow up, be a kid and a young adult, a teen and a young adult in the post-war um, boom. I mean, that's what it was. The economy was expanding. A great novel because I'm a bit of a bibliophile, and my one of the best books I've ever read by John Grisham. Not a lawyer book. It's actually a piece of literature. It's up there in my mind with Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which I've also read. Um, and it's called A Painted House, and it's about maybe Alabama, maybe Georgia, deep south, and a cotton farm after the end of World War II and the expansionist and how industry was booming, and anyone who wanted to work, there was work, and the harder you worked, the more money you made, and life was good. And it was good for a long time, right through the 60s up until about the oil embargo. And then there was a major recession starting in the 70s, and inflation. We got double-digit inflation, and things got hard. But from the end of the war, the Second World War, through the 50s to 60s, right up until the very early 70s, things were booming in the Western developed world and certainly in the United States. But it's funny, Brett is writing, I was alive in 1930. When I was in the military, we went to the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa, uh, one of my unit, a course I was on. And we went and visited it, and I was one of the older guys, and they kept asking me, well, when we went by an exhibit that showed the artillery being used in the Boer War in South Africa in the 1890s, and guys were saying, hey, Kasi, what was it like shooting that gun back in the Boer War? Oh, shut up. Sometimes they used to be called Father Time. Uh, Laura is saying that organic brown eggs, 10.94 a dozen. Regular white eggs, 5.97 a dozen. Wow. Wow. And that would be darn near $10 Canadian. To get $6 US would cost about $10 Canadian. That's crazy. Eat Me's writing at Laura Floyd. Is writing at Laura Floyd. How much does the queso fresco goes at nowadays? I don't know what they're talking about. Uh, Mud Duck Farmer is writing. What do you mean? I don't yet. I can't say I don't use AI because I go onto Google now and I type something because I want to learn something or I want to check something, and it gives you an automatic AI generated response. So you can't avoid AI. Just reading through the messages and trying to get caught up. Oh, AI. Yeah, AI is, we've already outsourced our brains to our smartphones. I don't own one. I got rid of mine, and even when I had a smartphone, I was an old. The last phone I had was a Samsung S3, and I used it for two things and two things 99% of the time. It was for talking and texting. And then I would take some pictures and video with it on rare occasions. During the trucker convoy, I walked down the on ramp at my town, exit 509 on the 401, and I walked down to get a nice video of everyone who was up on the overpass for when the truckers came through. Thank you for the thumbs up, Eat Me. I appreciate you always reminding. It's tough in this YouTube world, and a voice such as mine that is somewhat counter and no production values or anything like that. So anything you can do to build the channel, I appreciate. I'm trying to do what I can. I'm not the most tech savvy guy in the world, though. Uh, What is the minimum wage in Texas? Sharunian voting as a black Marxist. Uh, and you guys are talking about stores that I'm not familiar with. Uh, I think there is an agenda at foot that, when you look at the old Georgia Guidestones and the number one guiding principle is written on them about, what the world's population should be maintained at under 500 million. And you wonder, what are the three main drivers of limiting or mitigating population growth among human beings? Three things, in my estimation: war, disease, famine. And could we be looking at all three at once? I think it's time to look at getting some chickens, look at having a backyard farm. But if you live in typical suburban style home, and even though I'm in a rural area, I have your typical suburban style lot. I don't have an acre to farm. How many carrots? How many potatoes, how many peas, how much of this stuff can you grow? And then houses nowadays don't have cold cellars the way that they did back in the day for you to store those roots and those vegetables and those things. And look at the price of electricity and what's going on. Because in Canada, we keep getting hit with more and more carbon taxes. And Mark Carney is saying that he's going to eliminate the carbon tax that consumers are paying, and he's instead going to force polluters, those who are producing the carbon, they're going to pay the tax, and then they'll just pass it down to us in higher costs. So no matter what happens, there's only one taxpayer. We're going to end up paying. Uh, Mud Duck Farmer, where are you? Because it's Be Nice to Canada. They got it or they get it. Uh, and at the end of the day, Americans, Canadians, we're the same basic people. We have different mindsets a lot of the time. Canadians are far more socialistic in nature. We love our healthcare system. And let's face it, our healthcare system is incredibly flawed. So many Canadians can't get a family doctor. Um, we have lineups to, if you require surgery or knee replacement, you can be waiting 6 months, a year, 2 years, depending. So our problem, and it doesn't matter how much money the government pours into healthcare, no matter how much money they pour in, it's never enough. They could announce tomorrow that we found $100 billion for Ontario's healthcare system, and we're going to be giving them $100 billion more each and every year. And within 14 months, within a year and a half, the healthcare system would be saying it's not enough. It's not enough. It's a bottomless pit. But in the US, the United States spends more per capita on healthcare than any country in the world, and yet it's got some of the worst health outcomes in the world as well. The amount of money they're spending on healthcare in the US doesn't bring the health benefits with it. So there are challenges to both. Uh, Oh man, the Ukraine situation. What I was originally planning to talk about before and I was fully expecting. I thought cooler heads would prevail on the tariff front, and I thought it was just Trump being bombastic and trying to bully Canada. I did my podcast style interview with my buddy Jack Lapierre, former firefighter, and I liked his line of thinking, but it doesn't look like he was on the money. His line of thinking was that this was just Trump's way of trying to get Canada to clean itself up a bit. But no, it's going deeper than that. Let's see what's being written. Oh yeah, this is the thing. Here's what Eat is writing. We have these resources, but the ecologists don't want us to access our resources, and this is the biggest problem we have in Canada. Is we've got all this natural, LNG and all this oil in Alberta, and It's all going down to the US right now because we tried to build a pipeline called Energy East that would have taken the oil from Alberta out to, we have refinery capacity in the province of New Brunswick, and get it through. And no, can't do it. It's not environmentally friendly. Then they wanted to have I think it was called the Northern Gateway pipeline to the west coast of British Columbia so that we could ship LNG, liquefied natural gas, to Japan and to overseas to other countries. Apparently, other countries have been coming to Canada saying, sell us your LNG, we need it. And we can't get it to them because we won't build the pipeline to send it out there. And so instead, what do these countries do? They start burning coal. Yeah. Well, we can't sell you our, far less environmentally damaging LNG. LNG is much cleaner than coal, but rather than sell them our liquefied natural gas, we have them burn coal instead. Canada's a mess. There's a, but the problem is the solutions we have would lead to greater prosperity. Cheap energy. It drives an economy. And if you drive the economy higher, then people get wealthier. And if people get wealthier, their expectations rise. And right now, we're entering a phase in globalization where they don't want people wanting more. They want us being willing to settle for less, being willing to own nothing and be happy because they'll tell us to be happy. Um, Amy's writing herd immunity, talking, getting back to the culling of all the birds, uh, and saying that there's a farm out in BC that they want to cull the ostriches, emus. They're going to cull them all. Laura Floyd is writing at me that the minimum wage is $7.25 in the state of Texas, but many retail and restaurant employees pay over 10, some 16 hourly, but part-time hours. In Canada and Ontario, it's like 16 or $17 an hour is the minimum wage. And it depends where you are. In my area, that's not bad. But if you're living in Toronto, forget it. Like, it's not a living wage in Toronto because the cost of living is so high in the urban centers. Uh, and I don't even know what HEB is because we don't have one here. We have Walmart, though. What's Mud Duck saying? We can't afford health here, so better and wait than it just. Laura's writing, I don't think so, but I have retail for many years, but they pay has been 9.76, 14 and 16 hourly, but only part-time. It's rare to get 40 hours unless you're a business professional or government worker. Yeah. This is what happened in 1988 when Canada signed on to the US free trade deal. Is so often so many of our jobs went down to the US to jurisdictions with either no minimum wage or much lower minimum wages. Then in 1994, Mexico came on board. And then so many of those jobs that were in the US, especially high paying union scale wage jobs, they went down to Mexico where people were willing to work for $5 a day and no bathroom breaks. And it was and it is a race to the bottom. And this is where I support Donald Trump wholeheartedly in terms of, you know, wanting protectionism to protect US industry and US jobs, but it has to be industry specific. It cannot be sweeping it wide across the board. I think there are globalist players who are manipulating Trump. Now, or maybe he's part of the game as well. Maybe he's just, a wrestler following the script. Who's to say? Um, Laura saying, I don't think so. But okay, I read that already. Oh, global warming is a sham hoax. Uh, I think I'm almost pretty much caught up. Amy, who is in Montreal, she says 13 isn't so bad for Wally World. I'm assuming that's Walmart. Then again, might have to check on an HEB flyers to get my bearings price. So it looks like I caught up. Laura saying the lines in the sky daily, weather modification. Well, that's what I'm talking about. So many, I think we are going to be hit by so many different crises, plural, all at once or in very short order, one after another. The war in Ukraine, if Great Britain starts sending troops, will other NATO allies follow suit? Is Trump, or rather, is Putin in on the game? Is he a globalist player as well, or is BRICS a genuine threat to U.S. dollar, as the world's dominant reserve currency? I mean, there's something to talk about. Is the fact that just about every country in the world has to hold literally typically hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in reserve. And right now, that reserve that they hold is in US dollars. It's the world currency. But if they start, and that helps prop up the value of the US dollar. Just about all the oil that is traded in the world, when someone goes to Saudi Arabia or to Iran, Iraq, or Kuwait, or wherever they're getting their oil from, when they buy it in US dollars. It's sold to them and they buy it in US dollars. So they have to have huge US dollars reserves in their, they've got to have a huge, massive US dollar holdings. And that drives up demand for the US dollar. It's a fiat currency. The value of the US dollar is based on how much it's desired in the marketplace. So as long as all the world's oil is being traded in US dollars, everyone's hoarding huge amounts, hundreds of billions, trillions of US dollars. Then, if all of a sudden trade in oil was to switch even somewhat or totally to a BRICS currency or to the euro or the ruble or some alternative currency, then what are countries going to do? They're going to start selling their US dollars and they're going to start buying euros or rubles or a BRICS currency. And then what happens to the value of the US dollar? Because it's a fiat currency. Its value is based on the demand that people have for the US dollar in the marketplace. Are people buying US dollars, or are they trying to get rid of them and get a different currency? And you talk about the potential for the world to be turned upside down. Trump could be walking into the worst time ever to be a US president. Uh, Mudduck's asking if I still, or if I solder or ham radio. Nope, don't have a ham radio. Even though I was a rat op, all the radio equipment I used was issued by the Army. Just catching up again. A few more messages. Have you heard about Myrtle Beach, South Carolina? A small city in the making. Myrtle Beach is burning bad like LA. Oh, you're kidding. Myrtle Beach? I did not hear that. Have you heard about Myrtle Beach in South Carolina? A smart city in the making. Myrtle Beach is burning bad like LA. I'm going to do a quick little search on that. MYR. Carolina fire updates. Wildfires burn in Myrtle Beach area, threatening homes and forcing wonderful. And this is part of it. This is part of it. This is the environment. There's an economic component. We're seeing that play out in the United States. So we got economy. We got turmoil in the economy, turmoil in the environment. Then we can have health again, health scare. What else could we have? We could have cyber attacks. We could have terrorist style attacks. See what's happened in Germany with all those individuals plowing their cars into crowds. And then, of course, we could have more large scale, somewhat traditional war, whether asymmetrical or otherwise, like what's happening between Ukraine and Russia or down in, and that's the thing. The Israel war is poised to start up again, even bigger than it was before. There's a member of the Israeli war cabinet who have said that unless Hamas returns either all or a large number of the hostages that they still hold, both living and dead, if Hamas doesn't return them, that they're going to close the door on Gaza and open up the gates of hell. I'm not sure on the first part of the quote, but opening up the gates of hell. That is what he said. He's either said we're going to shut the gate on Gaza, on the Gaza Strip, and open up the gates of hell. It's basically what he said. And because everyone's now fixated on the Russian Ukrainian situation and on the unfolding economic situation between Trump and Canada and Mexico, and what's it going to mean? Are we entering a trade war? Could the U.S. Determine that it's vital to American security to ensure it has access to vital minerals like nickel? And could they then send troops and occupy Canada? And goodness knows the Canadian military doesn't have the capacity to withstand a U.S. If the U.S. came and put troops on the ground in Canada, there's heck, they've already probably got troops here stationed permanently, living here. Would not take much. Let's get caught up. Oh, yeah. And Laura's saying measles in the news. Yes, that's in the news. There was one case, I forget where, Hamilton, Guelph. It was in Guelph. One case in Guelph, one case of measles. And it's news. It's like that Eastern equine encephalitis. One guy probably in his 80s in the state of Massachusetts died. And it was an outbreak of Eastern equine encephalitis. And I swear, I think to a degree it's just testing. How are people reacting? But that one case led to outdoor activities being banned, schools closing down things like outdoor practices for football and things because it's a mosquito-borne illness. And oh my God, Eastern equine encephalitis, and your brain will swell. And oh my gosh, how many people have died? 100? Dozens? Well, one guy who was like 88 and was already dying anyway. COVID all over again. Yeah, I read about him. So I got to check into that. I got to check into it more, but I did just read in the Independent says Carolina fires update: wildfires burn in Myrtle Beach area, threatening homes and forcing. And I can't read the rest of the New York Times, wildfires continue to burn in the Carolinas, prompting evacuations. That was 8 hours ago. And this is the thing, we're getting hit by so many different. And where do you look? Do you look at the tariffs being imposed? Do you look at Russia, Ukraine? Do you look down in Israel where they're going to open up the gates of hell? Where do you look? And we're going to be hit with so many things all at once. And I don't think it's going to be that long. I would be very surprised if it didn't happen this year, certainly by the end of next year. Going to read up the last few and then I'm going to bed because it's 1 o'clock in the morning. Laura hadn't heard of Myrtle Beach, but I haven't checked the news. I was talking to people at work today, and people are amazed constantly. It was everyone's coming in. It's a retail establishment. Everyone's coming in. And do you have, is this Canadian? The news told me to only buy Canadian, and I only want to buy because I hate Trump. And I had a coworker say to me, "Oh, I am so sick of all these people," and da 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 da. And then she said, "But I know I have to be careful. I can't speak my mind." and she and I are very simpatico. We see the world very much the same. And I said, I'm not kind. I speak my mind regardless. I had one guy staring daggers at me because someone came up and they said, you know, I only want to buy Canadian. I don't want to buy anything made in the U.S. I said, well, you're gonna have to look. I said, I don't know. The world's economies are so integrated now that part of that is probably made in the U.S. But whatever. I don't. I said personally, I don't really care. And a guy who wasn't in the conversation looked over at me like, and I swear I thought he was about to have an aneurysm because I wasn't all waving the Canadian flag and everything. We need, I haven't said it enough yet on tonight's stream, but we need Christ. We need to be unified in Christ, whether you're American, Canadian, Western European, Ukrainian, Russian, Israeli, a resident of Gaza. This world, we need Jesus Christ more than ever right now because the challenges that are coming are going to be designed to tear us apart and to get us all pointing toward a savior. A globalist savior is going to come in, swoop in, and save the day. That's the script. That's the way it's written out. And you better be in relationship with the maker of all things through his son, Jesus Christ, because otherwise you're going to have a heck of a time navigating this world. Um, I'm just going to catch up on the last few, and then I'm going to wish everyone a very happy, peaceful, and joyous good night. And remind us, whether American or Canadian, Western European, or wherever you are in the world, that, and I don't care if someone is a professing Christian or not, they're still my brother and sister in Christ. Because Christ is the king of this world. Whether you recognize it or not doesn't dispute the fact that this is my theology. Jesus is king of this world. And whether you acknowledge it or not doesn't, I don't like the fact that King Charles is the ruler of Canada. He is the head of state for Canada, whether I like it or not. That is reality. Nothing becomes law in Canada until it receives something called royal assent. And the Governor General signing on behalf of the King enacts law in Canada. And I don't have to like it, but that's reality. And the reality of creation is that Jesus Christ is the King of this world. He is the name above every other name. Now, not everyone likes that. Not everyone recognizes it, but it doesn't dispute the fact that it is reality. And we will come to that. We will come to know that reality, all of us, when we cross the veil. That's a Christian term for when we go to our great reward, when we lose this mortal, decaying sack of bones and skin, when it finally gives it up. You don't end. You don't end. Energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. And we are energy beings. We are an electrical storm going off in our brains or our nervous systems, and every thought we have gives off an electrical impulse. And consciousness continues. And we're going home. And I like what Brett is saying. See y'all later. Be safe out there. Keep chugging along. False motivation better than no motivation. You got to have something. 51st state, ring in the wrecking ball and build it anew. We're already the 51st state. We just haven't recognized it yet. We ceded when you cede your economic autonomy, the political autonomy is going to follow inevitably. And it took 50 odd years, but we're there. I guess 37. We're coming up on 40 years. It was 37 years ago that we signed on to we handed over economic sovereignty to the United States. Now the political sovereignty is going to fall. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I was wrong about Kamala Harris being installed as US president. You know, Biden being kicked out. I was wrong about that completely. So maybe I'll be wrong about this. We'll see. We'll see what happens tomorrow. I'm sure there'll be lots of news. Is Ontario going to shut off nickel? Vital nickel. It's vital to the US economy. It's vital to the manufacturing industry. It's vital to the arms industry. And what is Trump going to do when, if Doug follows through on that, our high school drug dealer premier who got thrown into was handed to us as premier because CTV went to air with false allegations. The premier of Ontario should be Patrick Brown, but then CTV News, the division of Bell Media, went to air back in 2018 or 19 and said that Patrick Brown had sexually assaulted two women. And didn't take long. A couple months later, we found out that those allegations were 100% completely false and fabricated. But that forced Patrick Brown out. He was going to be the premier of Ontario. And then we got a high school drug dealer who, whatever they tell him to do, shut down nickel to the U.S. That'll do it. Okay. I'll go on NBC and I'll tell them. Tell them how much you love them too, Doug. Tell them you love Americans. Okay. Whatever you tell me. Yeah. I don't want to go back to drug dealing. Anyway. Nortel made good stuff, but they never made any money. Yeah, 1988 was the year when the free trade agreement was first signed. Don't take my word, check into it. But that was when Brian Mulroney was prime minister, and he negotiated it during his first term in office. So he got elected in 1985, and in 1988, it came up, and the Canadian Senate refused to pass it. They said that he didn't have a mandate to negotiate a free trade agreement, so we had an election on it, and Mulroney was returned with a majority again, and then the Senate passed it, and it was enacted in 1989, signed in 1988, enacted in 1989, going off memory, and in 1994 expanded to include NAFTA. Canada made awesome fighter and could have done space launch. Oh, we had the Avro Arrow, and we'll never find out exactly what happened with that. And I don't think there's any more nickel in our nickels anyway. I think most of our coin is zinc. If you go back, I think it's 1964. I've got a U.S. dime that's silver from 1960. I think it's 1964. It was in and around that era, 1964, when coins in Canada and the US stopped using silver. If you ever come across an American Canadian dime, nickel, quarter, especially dimes and quarters, they actually contain silver in them and are worth more than the dime or the quarter. Of course, to make it worthwhile, you need to collect a few of them, but they're worth significantly more than a quarter or a dime. And he remembers 1988 well. Amy thinks that Patrick Brown is still a piece of shit. Just watch Rebel News coverage. Patrick Brown, I'll tell you something. He's a geek, a bit of a nerd. He has no real charisma, but I think there's more there than meets the eye. And it's demonstrably true that they went to air with false allegations. And he wasn't part of the political machinery. He was a rank outsider who basically crashed the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. He wasn't part of the machinery, and he came in and he crashed the system, and they were pissed and they wanted him out. And CTV was willing to go to air with false allegations, false quote unquote Me Too. I'll do a video stream on Patrick Brown. He's an incredible character. I read his book, Takedown, and that's what it was. He was taken down, he was taken out. Anyway, and he remembers the Abro. Yeah, the US had a hand in shutting that down. Why? I'll never know. That thing would still be flying now. It would be the best jet in the Iranian Air Force. It would be their best fighter plane if we had ever built the damn thing. Anyway, God bless. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord grant you peace. And we will see what happens tomorrow. There's going to be something going on in the world, no doubt. So, and until then, keep well and don't stress out over anything because we'll get through this. And this life ain't the end anyway.